Hello and welcome to another lighting diagram. I'm Trenton Hoshiko, and today we are talking about Two Disciples at the Tomb by Henry Tanner. Now, this is a relatively simple painting in terms of its scale, but what I love about it is the amazing golden glow on the two figures. So I wanted to talk about it today because I think there's a couple different ways to do this for budget-conscious production while achieving a look that is like this. So let's get started by taking a look at the painting and some details about it. So our light is definitely coming left to right. We have the source coming from the opening here and casting upon them. Another good clue is we look at the shadow on the chest here and shadows under the cheek. Those are good ways for us to kind of identify the angle of the light. Now, the shadows aren't incredibly long and the illumination wraps around further down the shoulder than I'd expect if it was just a straight on light. So I think that the light is just a little bit over to the side. The subject that's in the foreground has much more of that golden glow. The subject in the background, while still kind of golden, is a little bit less bright in tone. So we can't assume that the actual light source is from inside of the opening. The background, while you can make out some of the definition even though it's night, I don't think it's actually playing that much of a role in terms of exposure for the two subjects here. We do have the light kind of fall off as it gets lower in the frame, with the hand being darker. So let's start building this out. So I'm working in the program Draw.io, which is a free and open source diagram software that I like to use for diagramming art that I'm going to be using for reference images for cinematography or photography. I have a link down below where you can go and get Draw.io. Now I have all these filmmaking tools at the top here. Now these aren't really built into Draw.io. I actually made my own template. If you want to get this same template and all these same tools that are customized for filmmaking use, you can go over to my Patreon and get the template completely free. You don't have to pay for it or anything like that. I just want to put it out there so that folks can use it for their own diagrams. While you're there, you can join to support my videos, including these lighting diagrams and my other pretty much weekly cinematography tip videos. The tiers start at just $2, but you can also join for free and just be there so that you can get notified when I release new videos. Getting started making your diagram in Draw.io is really easy, and I have a video that goes over that down in the video's description as well. Check that out if you need to see how to import images and import the tool set. So without any more delay, let's talk about the actual lighting in this image. Now with this kind of background, I was thinking a painted backdrop would look really cool. So let's play with it with a backdrop. And because of that, we're going to be playing with this as if it's a studio. So we have backdrop down, and then let's get two actors. So we have our two people here, and I'm going to put them just kind of like this. Now I want that backdrop pretty far behind them just so that we get nice good separation. With that being a backdrop, we will have to do some lighting for it so that we do get some of the details. But we're going to keep in mind that this is supposed to be a night scene overall. Let's place what could just be a few set walls here. The opening appears to be about 45 degrees to the subjects here. While the opening is the motivation for the light, I don't think that it necessarily exactly lines up with our subjects, but that's an artistic interpretation. I'm going to try to keep it a little bit more quote unquote realistic in terms of that angle. So I'm going to put the opening right about here. Yeah, so we have our set pieces here, and now we can place our camera. I would say that this is a almost telephoto look in terms of its frame and composition here. We have a lot of kind of compression between them and the background. I don't know that that's spatial compression as if Mr. Tanner was using a camera lucida or something of a similar optical nature, but what we do have here is some compression optically, at least in terms of the artistic interpretation. So we want, if we're going to be looking to recreate this kind of scene, let's move the camera back a little bit and zoom in with something on the telephoto side, maybe a 75-85mm lens, something in that kind of lower telephoto range. We don't want anything incredibly dramatic. We want to still be able to have this type of composition, but yeah, moving the camera back a little bit, having the zoom lens, and we should be okay. Now we do have our two actors right here, and we have the opening. I'm going to make the opening a little bit bigger than I had it originally, just to simulate how big this could be. These would be rock face, set walls that have to be designed, but I'm just using the built-in wall piece from Draw.io. that to me looks to be about what we need in terms of our setup, in terms of the space that we're using. Now, like I said, we're probably going to be on a stage for this. So one thing that I want to talk about is we could use lanterns to help just create a general overall even light. That obviously means that you have to have an overhead grid. That means you have to have more lanterns. It could get a little more expensive, but that's definitely a possibility. I'll get more into that in a few minutes. But let's start by placing our first light. Now, how am I going to achieve this type of glow? Well, what I want to use is light that's already pretty yellow or orange, and I want to use a gold reflector. Especially if we're coming at this from a budget type angle, I think that those are good ways to get us that look easily and for not too much money, and it will create this like really nice hard type light, because you can look at this shadow right there, and that's a pretty hard source. That line is incredibly distinct. So I want to do something that makes that light hard, reflecting it, because that creates more of a directionality with it. Not bouncing. Bouncing diffuses, reflecting makes lines harder, generally speaking. So I'm going to actually change this to reflect, and I'm going to change its color. So this probably would need to be the biggest 5-in-1 reflector that you can get. Something like a 4x6 or a 5x7. Those are some of the bigger sizes of those. And we're going to use that to just reflect a lot of golden light right onto our subjects. But if we're doing that, we need to place a lamp. And I would say that the lamp needs to be over kind of in this direction. The exact angle you would have to figure out, depending exactly on how the blocking works, if there's movement, if they're just already standing there. It kind of depends. But if we have our lamp that sort of comes here, we can bounce our light into our reflector and then back onto our subjects. And that should create a reasonably hard look. If you needed them to be able to enter into the opening, I would say that you could move this setup back into the actual interior space to achieve this. Like I said, it kind of really depends on how your blocking actually needs to function. One note that I will have is that to me, it appears that the light is coming pretty straight across, almost about chest height. And I think thematically and story-wise, that makes sense for this type of image. I don't want this light to be on a pigeon stand or on the ground, or also at the same time above them in particular. I want it to be kind of just bouncing into the reflector and then straight across to them. Now, like I said, you can play around with angles to get exactly what you would need. I would say that you could also do it this way. And it really just depends on the actual space that you're using. Now, keep in mind that because of how light works, the further away, the harder the source is going to be. And basically, we did move this reflector back a little bit. That should make those harder shadows than when it was right in front of them. So there's different advantages and disadvantages to multiple different types of setups. You could keep it all on the outside of the opening. You could put it on the inside of the opening in a similar manner to this, depending on exactly what you need. Now, this light does wrap around, though, pretty far to that far shoulder. And I want to be able to replicate that. And do excuse me, I did not put this wall, which would be this wall right here. We need to be making sure that we light this wall as well. So let's light that really quick. Now, I'm going to say once again, we need a lot of yellow light, but we don't need it to be as hard as this. It's a little bit more soft in nature. Yes, we do get the shadow, but it actually kind of like wraps around in a way that lightens the exterior, which this in theory could be very dark, especially when you look at up here, kind of at a similar distance. So I'm going to have us have a big sheet of diffusion, and we're going to use the lamps that are either tungsten, we're going to use colored gels with our diffusion, or we're going to use RGB lights that we can dial in a color to. And as I've mentioned before, the diffusion here could be a silk that will give you much more flexibility. It could also be a 5-in-1 reflector with the exterior reflector part taken off and just using the core as a diffusion silk. There's some flexibility here in how you actually manage this. It could be a 4x4, it could be a 6x6. I would say with how soft this is and how we want the light to be looking, having it be a little bigger would probably be better. Now this might need a good amount of light. If that's the case, you can double up lamps coming through it, but for this look, I'm just going to keep it as such. Now this is going to definitely spread our light a lot more. And we'll be looking at something like that. We have it coming around the edge just a little bit, but mostly kind of in line with that wall. And this still gives enough space that if you want them walking in, that can be managed even if your camera pans to the side. So I think that this could be a way to pull this off in terms of the lighting for the main scene here. Now let's talk about that backdrop again. Depending on what kind of backdrop you're using, lots of professional backdrops are made so that you can light from behind at night scenes and get just the brightest spots, like right here. There's like a star right there, to be shining through. And any lighter areas like skies might be brighter than darker areas. That is a distinct benefit of really nice, high quality professional film backdrops. So if you have one of those, you would just place some big lamps behind here. Now, it really depends on what kind of backdrop it is, and how much light you have per lamp, but having a row of 2Ks in the back would be something that would make that possible. But since we're talking more on the budget side of things, let's pretend that we're just having more of a painted type backdrop, something that you would maybe see more in a theatrical type space. So we're going to take this and we're going to light the backdrop from the side. And keep in mind, this has no relation to this source. It actually probably is moonlight coming from the direction of the backdrop. So we're cheating the actual scene just a little bit. But I'm going to say take a huge piece of diffusion. One thing, this could be a 5-in-1 reflector. And we're just going to pass our light through it like this. And we're going to set it up so that it casts across the entire backdrop. We want to be careful that this doesn't get all that much light onto our subjects. Anything that reflects off the backdrop onto them, I think is fine. We don't want this light to also be shining onto them. We don't want to see any of it on, the left side of the subject right here or right here. So if you need to, you could actually take a WAG flag and put it in between, just if there was a lot of spill coming off of that. If you want this to be a little bit cheaper, instead of using diffusion, you could use something like a large octabox or a large softbox, something like that. Anything that you can use to cover pretty much the entirety of this. Now, at the same time, you will want to be careful because you may get a hot spot on one edge if it's closer. So kind of keeping it a little bit further back and trying to be even with the wall is important. Now, something that isn't in this actual painting, but I think would be useful, would be to have just a little bit of a hair light, especially if the moon's coming from this background over here. For that kind of look, I would actually get above the backdrop wall with a lamp and a Fresnel. And I'd have that cast onto the backs of our subjects here. And we don't need anything extreme, but just something a little bit to help separate them from that background, I think would be useful. And so maybe something that's a little tinted blue, but we want it to be just really narrow and just casting onto the backs of their heads so that as they move, they are separated from the background. I would try to match the kind of general tone, maybe not the saturation, as in the sky of the backdrop. Something like this. Now, I started by saying this is a relatively simple scene, and it is a relatively simple scene, but we do have 1, 2, 3, 4 lights, and we are also having 1, 2, 3, 4 modifiers. We have to have a backdrop and we have to have set walls, and depending if you need it or not, the WAG flag. And so I did save a little bit of money over here by having the octabox be replaced in the diffusion sheet. And if you wanted to save a little bit more money, you could also do a similar thing over here. Now, once again, you could get a little bit more of a circular look to the actual shaping of the light. You might want to use a large softbox instead. It really depends on exactly how far away this is and exactly the size of the octabox you have, but that would save you just a little bit of money and a little bit of grip gear. But this is the general way that I think you could pull off this look. Now, I did mention before that you could have some space lights that help create a general illumination. That would be something like I'm going to use the lantern here, but this would be more of a space light. We would have a row of these against the backdrop and along their subjects, just to create kind of a general overall lighting. That is a good way to get a cloudy moonlight type look. But that also, like I said before, increases the expense a lot. What we've been talking about without the space lights would mean that you're going to have more pockets of darkness, but you are going to save some money in terms of that, and you might not have to get as professional of a studio to work with. You could do this type of setup pretty easily on a local community theater stage. You don't need anything too wild to do it. You don't need a whole lighting grid like you would need if you're going to be doing space lights. But I just wanted to mention the space lights because that is a great way to help get kind of a base exposure when doing moonlight. And if you do end up needing to have just a little bit more light, you could always do something like a lantern from in front of them, but hung up above to just give a little more exposure if you need it. But if you can tolerate having a little bit harsher shadows, a little bit more darkness, a little bit more pockets of darkness around as the actors might move, you don't necessarily need that lantern. Now, I'd say that one thing with how I've lit this, especially because I'm trying to be budget conscious, is that you might not get enough light onto them. Then if that's the case, you might need to move your reflector a little bit closer. Like I said at the beginning, you could have that reflector set up on the outside here, but be using the entrance as an actual motivation for the light. There's ways to be a little more flexible with it. You could end up needing to have, instead of just the lantern here, but maybe a soft box or another diffusion frame. But the goal here is really to get that really nice glow to it. And that's why I really went with the reflector here, so we could get that golden reflected light that creates that hardness, but also just this really beautiful shimmer. I think that that is a key aspect to how this painting functions. And combining that with yellow light, yellow gel sphere octabox, and some blue light for the moon to create a little more of color contrast, I think it would work really, really well. So these are our final setups. This one has just a little bit more money and a little bit more grip intensive nature to it than this one, but they are essentially the same thing. And like I said, you could do something like this in a community theater stage type space. You don't need to have a huge lighting grid. You do need the pieces of equipment, but the tools here are reasonably affordable for productions, especially if you're renting them. I want to thank you so much for watching the video. If you liked it, please give it a like down below. It helps me reach new viewers who like these same types of lighting diagrams. If you want to pick up the tools that I've talked about in how to create a scene like this, I have affiliate links down in the video description. Those help support the channel. Like I said before, if you want to join me on Patreon, that's another great way to support the channel. And you can pick up my free filmmakers template on there as well. All of those links are down in the video's description. I'll see you next time, and I hope that you have a wonderful week ahead of you.